In a shocking turn of events, Kaulig Racing loses their appeal. Yesterday, Cup Series team owners boycotted their scheduled meeting with NASCAR. The reason? The charter system. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Before we get started, NASCAR Hall of Famer Mark Martin joined Power Hour with me and Brennan Poole this week. We had an incredible conversation about the highs and many lows of Mark's racing career. He had some great advice for really anyone, but especially up-and-coming drivers. He gave his hot take on respect racing etiquette, where things stand today, and so much more. It was a great pleasure to have Mark Martin on the show. So if you want to watch the latest episode, that link is down in the description, as are all the audio podcast links. It's available anywhere you get your podcast. That's Power Hour, presented by Circle B Diecast. Be sure to check out the latest episode. This season, NASCAR is celebrating their 75th anniversary. Back in 1998, during the 50th anniversary, NASCAR released their own definitive list of the greatest 50 drivers in the sport's history at that time. Today, NASCAR announced they're doing the exact same thing this year, but now for the top 75 greatest drivers in their history. Here was NASCAR's statement. In honor of NASCAR's 75th anniversary, NASCAR will celebrate the 75 greatest drivers throughout its history. This is a continuation of the popular program established in 1998, recognizing the 50 greatest drivers. A group of industry representatives have identified the 25 new drivers who will join the already established 50. These 25 drivers will be revealed throughout April, with 5 drivers unveiled weekly starting next week. The culmination of the program and celebration of the 75 greatest drivers will take place in person on Sunday, May 14th at Darlington Raceway. Pretty cool deal, Darlington Raceway, May 14th, Mother's Day, also throwback weekend, although I've noticed we haven't seen too many throwback paint schemes revealed, at least not for that race. We've seen some good ones for North Wilkesboro, like Kevin Harvick bringing the 29 back, but I'm not sure we've seen any Darlington throwbacks revealed. Either way, the last few years, traditionally, this has been throwback weekend. Great chance to highlight these 75 greatest drivers. I'm curious though, they say they're adding 25 to the existing 50, so they're not changing the 50 greatest drivers as of 1998, they're just adding to it. Obviously names like Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, who weren't champions in 1998, they'll be on the list. But I'll be curious to see if any current drivers get left off. Like, I have Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott in my top 75 drivers of all time. I'd argue even Austin Dillon is a top 75 driver. He's won a couple of crown jewels, he's an Xfinity Series champion. But for some of those guys, perhaps to make the list, they'd probably have to kick some folks from 1998 off. And since they're not doing that, I'm not sure how many drivers there will be room for here the next few weeks. But I'll be curious to see who NASCAR and their group of industry representatives select as the top 75 greatest drivers in NASCAR history. Now, unfortunately, the rest of this episode is going to be quite political. Not like Washington, D.C. politics, red versus blue, left versus right. Not that kind of politics, but NASCAR politics, motorsport politics. Right now, NASCAR Congress is in gridlock. Yesterday, team owners decided to boycott, completely skip out on a scheduled meeting with NASCAR, citing their frustration with how slowly negotiations for a new revenue distribution model have been going. We also got reports yesterday that the team owners wanted Jim France, current CEO of NASCAR, and Lisa France Kennedy to be more present during these negotiations. The team owners also told the media that they believe NASCAR is negotiating in bad faith. So gridlock maybe was too kind a word. Things seem to be at an impasse between the teams and between NASCAR. Now, late yesterday afternoon, both The Athletic and the Associated Press shed some additional light on these tensions. I first want to read you a passage from The Athletic. The teams and NASCAR have reached a point of relative satisfaction over a new revenue sharing model that would see owners receive a greater share of revenue. The charter system model remains a sticking point, with NASCAR chairman Jim France said to be dead set against making it permanent, according to one team executive. Okay. Well, it's good to know that the teams in NASCAR did agree on something pretty major, but if you can't agree on the charter system, everything else is basically moot. Jim France is against making the charter system permanent. We'll get into that more in a moment, but first I want to read you this quote from Curtis Polk. He represents 2311 Racing. He's one of Michael Jordan's business partners. Here's what he told the Associated Press. Quote, "The charter system is the foundation that everything else is built upon. If they gave you the moon, but they're able to take it away from you periodically, what good is having the moon?" A very vivid description there, but Curtis Polk makes a very good point, and I don't think many fans are gonna want to hear this. NASCAR Cup Series teams like the charter system. They like it because it finally gives them something of significant value. It's a security that previous teams throughout NASCAR history really never had. The charter system is why we've seen Michael Jordan, Justin Marks, Maury Gallagher, and others invest in or start their own race teams. You can argue, and many fans have, that the charter system was poorly thought out at the beginning when it was first introduced and implemented back in 2016. But I'd argue that with where it is now, the monster it's grown up to be, it almost has to be made permanent. I don't think there's any way you could get rid of it now. 2311 Racing, a couple of years ago, reportedly paid Starcom $13-14 million for their charter. If NASCAR were to eliminate the charter system, effectively they'd be taking $13-14 million of 2311's money and be flushing it down the toilet without the team's consent. There is no way the teams would go along with that, and with the value of charters being what they reportedly are now, there's no way NASCAR can afford to just buy all the charters back. So I don't know what they should do. I read those reports as NASCAR does want to extend the charter agreement, they just don't want to make it permanent. My guess, and I must admit, most of what I'm talking about is largely a guess, just a theory, but my guess is NASCAR doesn't want to make the charter system permanent because they still want to maintain some level of control over the teams. As long as the charter system isn't permanent, NASCAR can still kind of hold that over the teams when they need to. I could be missing something, but the way I see it, I'm not sure how NASCAR and the teams are going to agree on this. I'm not smart enough to know what should be done. Maybe there's a way they can find common ground even without making the charter system permanent, but I just don't see how you could ever take the charters away at this point. I'd be curious to know what you think down in the comment section below. This is going to be a very interesting story to follow over the next few weeks, potentially the next few months. We're done talking about the gridlock in the legislature. Now let's talk about the NASCAR judicial system. I warned you, this episode was going to be political. Yesterday, the independent National Motorsports Appeals Panel decided to largely uphold the massive L2 penalty NASCAR handed Kaulig Racing. Little background information here. A few weeks ago at Phoenix Raceway, remember NASCAR confiscated the hood louvers off every single Hendrick Motorsports car. They also confiscated one louver off of Kaulig's number 31 car. NASCAR handed each Hendrick car a massive penalty. They handed Kaulig's number 31 team a massive penalty. Last week, the National Motorsports Appeals Panel rescinded the vast majority of Hendrick's penalty. They gave them all the points back. NASCAR was furious. Today, the same National Motorsports Appeals Panel, though it was a different three-person panel than the ones who heard Hendrick's argument, they decided to uphold the vast majority of Kaulig's penalty. So Hendrick got away virtually scot-free. Kaulig Racing will continue to receive capital punishment. Now, I did say they mostly upheld the penalty. They did reduce the regular season points from a 100 driver owner point penalty to 75. That's 25 points, but the 75 point deduction still stings way more than any penalty Hendrick Motorsports was left with last week. Kaulig Racing does not agree with this decision. They released this statement this morning. Following the results of the appeal hearing on Wednesday, Kaulig Racing has decided to move to a final appeal hearing with the National Motorsports Appeals Panel. That's right, teams are allowed to escalate their appeals one level further to the final appeals officer. The final appeals officer in this case is Bill Mullis. He is the promoter over at Langley Speedway. According to Bob Pockrass, no date has yet been set for Kaulig's final appeal, but it's happening. There's a lot to digest here. At first glance, the optics of this ruling look terrible. I'm sure you've seen it on social media the past 24 hours. Fans are in uproar. This looks, on the surface, like blatant favoritism in favor of Hendrick Motorsports, a legacy team who's won championships, dozens and dozens and dozens of races over the new team, Kaulig Racing, who's only been in Cup for like 2 full-time years now, doesn't have the same pull as Rick Hendrick. It looks like favoritism. It looks like NASCAR, or it's not even NASCAR's decision, it's the Independent Motorsports Appeals Panel. It looks like Rick Hendrick got away with murder, Kaulig Racing, they got the death sentence for doing the exact same thing. It doesn't look fair. There's not much NASCAR can do about that. This decision was not in NASCAR's control. NASCAR penalized both teams equally because in their eyes, there was an issue with single source parts. The teams brought them to the racetrack. They didn't go through the proper channels to get said parts fixed if they needed to be. NASCAR penalized both teams equally. It was the independent appeals panel that let one off the hook. The optics are terrible, unfortunately, but if we look below the surface, we don't know. This may be a perfectly justified and correct decision. The Hendrick one was weird because the appeals panel basically said, yeah, you did break the rules, but hey, here's your points back anyways. That part is weird, but perhaps Hendrick had the receipts. Perhaps they had really strong evidence to defend their case. Maybe there was poor communication from NASCAR. Kaulig, meanwhile, maybe didn't have the same receipts. Their evidence may have been quite a bit weaker. Maybe it was as simple as different appeals panel members hearing different arguments just had different opinions. Not a whole lot you can do about that, but maybe the appeals panel actually got these decisions right. The problem is there's no transparency. NASCAR has an explicitly written rule in their rulebook against transparency from the appeals panel. I appreciate Bozy tweeting this, but the rule says, appeals summaries shall be confidential and not released to the public by either party or shared or discussed via social media in any manner, whether in whole or in part. Release to the public may result in a penalty. So NASCAR has an explicit rule against any transparency from the appeals panel or their decisions. I'm sure NASCAR is regretting writing that rule about now, and I'm sure as soon as is humanly possible, they may consider rewriting that rule. But for now, the rule is no transparency. The appeals panel never has to explain why they decide the way they do. That's not good, and that's why there's so much uproar. Now, I understand in the Kaulig case, since they're taking this a step further to the final appeals officer, everything should stay confidential until that decision is made, but once the final appeals officer makes his call, whenever that case is heard, we're still not going to get any transparency, I imagine, unless someone amends the rulebook, NASCAR strong arms the appeals panel into making a case, they grant them a waiver or something. I don't know, but the fans deserve transparency. The industry, the other competitors deserve transparency. There's a lot of great quotes. Again, The Athletic did an article this past weekend out of Richmond that highlighted how so many other competitors, owners, crew chiefs in the garage are very frustrated and very concerned that Hendrick Motorsports got off virtually scot-free last week. I don't understand why NASCAR and the Motorsport Appeals Panel don't put a camera in the courtroom or the meeting room, wherever these appeals panels are heard, and live stream it. It's good content. I don't know, people my age love to watch court decisions, court cases play out in real time. It's just a thing. It's free content, be a great way to drum up some additional attention, and more importantly, there would be transparency. What do you have to hide? We're all adults here, supposed to be playing by the rules. It's a shame that there's no transparency in this case because as a result, we don't know. Maybe Kaulig was more in the wrong than Hendrick. Maybe the appeals panel got these decisions right. But because there is no transparency, we have no way of knowing. All we see is the final decision. And the final decision looks extremely biased. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Looking forward to hearing what the final appeals officer, Bill Bullis, what he decides. That'll do it for this episode. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel and you love NASCAR, hit that subscribe button down below. We keep up to date on all the latest racing news, and thank you to my Patreon supporters for your continued support. Once again, Mark Martin was on Power Hour this week. Please go check out that episode. Really enjoyed that conversation. I think you will enjoy listening to it as well. I will see you again very, very soon. Some other news coming out soon. The Denny Hamlin appeal is being heard today. The All-Star race format, I think, will be revealed tonight. So we'll be back soon to talk about even more NASCAR news. Thanks for watching, y'all.